Welcome back, everybody, to the Hope Axis. This is, I think, my 40th episode. And I'm sitting here with Paul Millerd, my friend, and somebody on whose podcast I was a guest last year. It's called The Pathless Path, like his incredible online community, as well as his first book. We will talk about it very soon. I have to tell you, Paul, that your podcast was low-key life-changing for me in some very unexpected. I didn't feel that it was good. I think it was one of my first podcasts after a big hiatus, so it felt really weird to be speaking in this public forum with somebody. So Interintellect, head of operations, had heard about Interintellect and me through this podcast, and she's amazing and a completely, indispensable human behind the scenes in Interintellect. So thank you for that. I mean, she had come after work to a New York gathering and, we made friends and started talking about working together. I had like other podcast invitations. I think some people had found out about some stuff in my background that I thought was obvious through your gentle and patient and insightful questions. And I keep reflecting on how ever much you think you speak publicly, for somebody, this new podcast, this new article, this new tweet will be the first time they ever hear. I mean, it's like the SKDC, a cartoon. For somebody, that will be the first time. Or that's the time when they will realize, like, oh, I was wrong about this person. I had like a whole full-blown opinion about them. And now I realize that they are not Swedish, but I don't know, German. So it's always worth speaking publicly. Always worth giving an interview and explaining really to you obvious things to the public. So I think we will talk about that a little bit here today. What hope is there for the intellectuals of the future, and how to speak about stuff that you figured out that to yourself has become obvious in a way that other people can have a eureka moment and think, oh my God, thank you, Paul, for explaining this to me. Welcome, Paul, to the Hope Axis. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I love that reflection, and I think it really captures something I really enjoy about what you coined as the interintellect movement. I think 30, 40 years ago, I would have been in academia, probably, sort of the only place to decamp from traditional work. But with the internet, you can sort of create like a thriving, rewarding intellectual life. And I think part of what it makes the internet way more fun than being in academia is the unexpected connections, right? You make a comment on this podcast, somebody listens to it 2 years later, some cool thing happens. And yeah, you don't do it directly for those things, but those random serendipitous moments give you enough joy and it just feeds the journey and makes it so much fun.
And you never know. Like when I was fundraising for Interintellect last year, I actually raised from by me much respected investor who only heard about me because I wrote a piece called "The Fog of Change" on Substack when the Ukraine war broke out, and I was very upset, obviously, by that. And it was a kind of moment of realization for me about certain things. And so I wrote this rant that people really enjoyed. And for some people, that was the angle, because they might not have read a piece about, I don't know, some other topic, but me writing about the Ukraine war felt like, oh, that's interesting, let's check it out. And whatever you're talking about, you get a chat. You're always talking about yourself in some weird way, right? Like it's same for the audience. Like the audience also goes to learn about themselves. Albert Camus has this line that, people want to read about themselves. Like you are the hero of a book, and a book that fails to make you feel like the hero of the story will not be interesting to you. Like people go and watch Hamlet because they don't care about this Danish prince. They know he will die. I mean, I hope, but they want to think about their own relationship with tradition and religion and their father and their mother and fencing and skulls, right? You have written two extremely interesting books about something that you see as a general trend, but they're kind of memoirs as well. People familiar with your work know that you had a very stressful white-collar job there are photos of you from that era, and you look so different. I love those like before and after photos of people. You had a miserable time. You had the time where you lived in a split reality. The people kept telling you how you're feeling and what your values are, and inside you were feeling, this is not how I'm feeling, and these are not my values. What now? And this was in an era where it was pre-interintellect, pre-Twitter renaissance. There were very few places to go to on the internet. So you actually left the continent. Do you want to tell us a little bit how the Pathless Path first manifested to you, and what was that like?
Yeah, so I I've always been online. I think like many of your guests and listeners and a lot of the people we've sort of realized there's all these people of our generation. I'm almost 40 in a few months. And there's all these like elder millennials that grew up very online, but nobody knew each other existed. And then there was like a Twitter scene in 2018, 2019 where it's like the Spider-Man meme. It's like, you're here. You've been here the whole time. And I think that was a part of me that was always there, but undernourished. And in the final few years of my career, I actually loved consulting at the beginning. It was so fast paced. It was a different world. I never had access to these really fast paced intellectual opportunities. I worked with smart people. But once I got good at it, like I was totally bored. I didn't want to get rich in this industry or climb the ladder in this industry. And so there was this creeping sense of disillusionment and cynicism that swept over me. And I think what it was is that I became disconnected from that curious creative mode, which I had when I was playing on computers, coding websites when I was young, or just posting on random blogs. And I quit my job in 2017. And like you alluded to before, I didn't really have like the others. I felt very alone. Like I would listen to Tim Ferriss and Derek Sivers and Seth Godin on podcasts and be like, okay, they make me feel good, but I don't have any friends in my real life that are doing these things. And so a lot of my writing
The
started
kind of
out,
social parasocial worlds hadn't yet collided, right? Like, or
yeah,
now the line is so thin, it's kind of insane.
yeah, but even then, I had been sharing on LinkedIn. I had been writing articles about like the future of work. And I remember meeting like two or three people in 2015, 2016. And I was just like blown away that I wrote an article about what I was interested in. And then I met these people that were also just interested in that. And it was like instant connection with these people. Um, and so that energy was exciting for me, and it just kept that. But after I quit my job, I didn't see writing as something I should do. I just thought, I'll become a freelance consultant, I'll work a little less, and I'll try to escape this reality. But over that first year and a half, I basically, all the like creative stuff just kept showing up more and more in my life. And I found it very jarring. The disconnect between the US scripts of like, you need to work, you need to follow the default path, especially New England. And all the people I knew, there was a disconnect between that. And I'm like, I'm going to write for fun for free because this is the most interesting thing. So I felt like an insane person. Um, and I think I needed space. I think moving to Asia was sort of me stepping into my season of solitude where I was able to just deepen into that creative mode. It was the first time moving abroad, living in Taiwan, that I was like, oh, writing. I love writing. I've been writing my whole life. I should keep doing this. And I basically spent the next 3 years just like hanging out online, only connecting with people I'm curious about and like sharing ideas. And I had no goals, but it was just like so thrilling and so fun. And then everything people have seen in terms of the extrinsic success is really downstream of that wandering, hanging out, screwing around. It's like Kevin Kelly says, like you need to goof off. And like I finally goofed off in my 30s.
I love this, and I'm so glad that you mentioned this kind of elderly millennial experience of the internet. I was reflecting the other day. So for me, I remember. So I was an encyclopedias girl. So I was very strange, sitting on my carpet the whole day, and I read all the dictionaries and the encyclopedias in the house. And I played this game that every time I learn something new or I learn a new word, I have to insert it in my thoughts immediately. So it's like a pickup thing. And then we got the computer, it's like mid 90s, and there were the Microsoft CDs. There was no
Oh
internet.
yeah.
So there was no connection. And I sat and I read all of the Microsoft CDs from Cinemania to like the ancient world. I just loved it. And then in like, I remember 1999, we get the super loud dial-up internet that ruined our family. And I haven't slept ever since. And then there was Wikipedia coming. And I think the only reason why I have a social life is because Wikipedia was not that good in the first year. So I had like 1 year in my early 30s where I had to leave my house. I think if that hadn't happened, and then how social media started, and there was Tumblr. We were talking about Tumblr before you joined. Catherine D was on the podcast. I think she was the second guest, and how important it was in Hungary, where I was at the time. Tumblr was used a little bit like Twitter. So people were like, indie journalists were using it for like making a brand for themselves and for very interesting discourse. But I remember in 2009, sorry, there was already Facebook. And this was the era of the BuzzFeed tests as a social vehicle. And I filled out a BuzzFeed test about which Hungarian indie rock star are you? And I wanted to like hack it, and I gave the worst response as a kind of joke to all the questions. And then this guy came out, and I posted on Facebook at the time, like, ha ha ha, I got this guy. I give the worst responses, and this is what I get. And I posted, and he messaged me. And 2 weeks later, we were dating, and this was a very long relationship. This is how I ended up dating a rock star in Hungary. So, you know, the millennials were really there in the kind of infancy of this whole thing and the implosion of the social and the parasocial, which is also not always the case. And there are people who kind of like get lost in that. But when it comes to Paul Millerd as a creator and as a movement builder, it's extremely good that they can actually go to a meetup with you in Austin and hang out, and that you can meet people and talk to them. I think it's a healthier way of interacting with people than like the 1990s celebrity craze and tabloid world, right? So I'm very happy to be, you know, a participant in this with you. Let's talk a little bit more about the tribe, because we were both there when the tribe wasn't there yet. Like you and I, we existed. We're in the same simulation, right? We're in the same timeline, and we didn't know about each other, right? And that was completely normal. We didn't even expect that. Like, how would we have met? Like maybe in a hostel while traveling, or at a conference, or like in a random way. And today we live in a world where we both are building these things, and we're making close friends, or even finding your partner, like or your co-founder, following your idea maze is a completely normal thing. Like what counts as normal has changed. When I published We Are Niche, We Just Didn't Know for InterIntellect in 2019, like 10 years after my BuzzFeed adventure, and that was the main feedback. Like, I found my tribe. Like, thank you, Anna, for writing this down, because now I know I'm not alone. And this is what people are saying about the pathless path, right? Talk about something that's obvious to you, but not for other people. How do you see the tribes forming around the pathless path? And what is the core value that you think you're offering or evoking through your work?
Yeah, it's so kind of weird. I think I published The Pathless Path, not even expecting it to sell that much. I literally took a consulting gig a month after my book launch because I figured, okay, this is either a money losing endeavor. I spent like $7,000 on the book, or best case, I'll break even. And so, yeah, it's been really, I'm still sort of adapting. I think identity lags reality a bit. But I actually did my first in-person event that was like just me outside of Austin in SF last week. And all the people I met were deeply reflective. I think the common bond is that And somebody was telling me this earlier, like my book is sort of an excuse through work to talk about the question of like, what is the life well lived? Like, what is the good life? That philosophical question and asking it. And I think I'm very lucky. Maybe it's because I tend to be just deeply curious and reflective too. But like most of the people I've retracted are very nuanced, very open to ideas, and very serious about taking those questions about what is the life worth living seriously. And yeah, it's really cool. I don't quite know what this community is or if it turns into anything. It's so hard for I don't know if I'm just bad at this. Like I'm not good at projecting the future, but it's clearly something people want. People keep using this term and I like people I saw a family like one of the moms is naming her Instagram account Pathless Path Year with my or Pathless Path Adventure. And she's using it to describe her leap with her kids. And like it's so wild. I'm still trying to get a handle on it.
I love this so much. It's like how Kyla coined a vibe session, and recently
Yeah,
government official in Canada used it.
so crazy.
So what is the life well lived, Paul?
I think I think it's just to continue to ask the question. I think that's what interests me most. I think this is what interests most curious people, people that really are committed to an intellectual life, is continuing to ask that question, right? I have this post where I say there are two kinds of people. Of course, there are never really two kinds of people, but the two kinds of people are question people and answer people. Answer people know where they stand on everything. They have the answer. If you ask them anything, if they ask them what is the life well lived, they might not have a detailed answer, but they'll be like, why waste time answering that? They have an answer. The question people are like, oh, that's a good question. I'm going to keep that question. I'm going to like stay with that question. And for me, it's constant. Since I've had a kid in the last 2 years, like a lot of stuff has been rearranged in my life. And I'm sort of reorienting and having to figure out stuff out again. How does work fit into my life? How do my financial goals shift? How do I think about where to live and family and things like this? So, yeah, I think it's all about just continuing to ask.
I mean, I think we all have our two kinds of people structures to help us life. We know it's reductive. We know it's not, it can't be, granular to reflect life properly. But for me, it's the users of the world and the builders. That there are people who find the world in some way, and for whatever reason, this seems for them to be a fit place to live. They might do like minor adjustments to the place, but they will use whatever they found. And there are people who have to build either because they have a kind of internal, drive to do that, or because it's just they don't fit in, right? Like I myself had to build my own world because there was nothing, or the available options felt like death. Like I can't live there, can't live in that way. And so for me, that's a really, really interesting question. And then you look at like geographically, right? Like America, which gets this more like conservative, right-wing, religious, reputation, especially in Europe, to me feels far more collective and in some original sense left, because you have to build your own community here. You have to build your own church. You have to build your own family. Like there are no ready-made structures. Whereas if you're born, why is there no interintellect in Rome, right? You're born in Rome. You are inheriting an old, beautiful culture. You don't feel that it's bad or lacking or missing. You will add your own little thing to it. But you're an heir. I mean, India, and there are other old cultures that refute this rule. That's why it's not just about external circumstance. It's also something about the internal culture of the person or the community. But to me, that's really, really, really interesting. And I'm absolutely with you on that. And the question I would ask from question people is, what makes you ask the question? What is that little itch, right? The hypomanic edge, or I don't know, that just and even you get the answer and you're like, you have follow-up questions. It's like really hard to accept. Did you find different questions or different propositions on what the life worth living is in San Francisco versus Austin? Did you notice any cultural differences?
I think a lot of people in SF are just like rich because of tech adjacency. Like, and yeah, I did a poll. I think there were about 70 people. I was like, raise your hand if you don't have a job. And like 70% of the hands went up. And so I think California has always been this leading edge
Amazing.
of
That's
yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but like, wow, 70% that's wild.
And this is like very much my bubble. I sort of reflected recently that we don't really hang out with anyone who has a full-time job. Uh, and one friend who is at the table with, he actually works remotely for a psychedelic startup. So we're like, well, that's kind of not normal job anyway. But yeah, I think there is this broad movement of underemployment and leaning into more space in life, basically to like leave that space open for whether it's for creative projects or family or even like huge bets once they emerge, right? And I think our economy is shifting more and more that way in terms of the possibilities. I think where I'm most interested is that people's scripts and the stories in their heads don't quite match up to that reality. And so I think it's going to be a slow shift. I think AI might accelerate this quite a bit. But I think we're in this dramatic shift of people's scripts lagging reality, but catching up somewhat.
I remember when I turned 30 and I woke up the next day and felt I don't have a script anymore. Or the script in my culture for women are only up to 30. And because after that, your family kind of swallows your identity and you take on a collective script. And I did not have family. I was a super brand new immigrant in London without a penny to my name on scholarship. And I felt this like exhilarating freedom. And my life literally started there. Like everything, other than like studying and reading a bunch of books when I was young and gathering some life experience, the active life of mine started there. And so seeing people probing these scripts, more proactively, to me, it seems like a very, very healthy thing. The full-time job thing, I mean, so I run InterIntellect as a full-time job, right? Like I've been doing it for over 5 years now. We are just about to have our 6th Christmas party, which is insane. Talk about identity.
That's amazing.
Realignment. And it's so funny because a lot of people in the community and a lot of hosts, they don't have a full-time job. And so, either you get like these invitations to retreats in the middle of the week where I'm like, I'm at work, like I can go to a few a year. But like I have employees and we're building technology and we have a bunch of events. Like I have to read a gazillion books every week for the events. Like it's not like, but there's a difference. And so Sahil Lavingia is a good friend and an investor in InterIntellect. He just renamed the parent company for Gumroad. And
yeah, I saw that.
He has a lot of notions about that. And the other thing that came to my mind, and I would love to hear your notes on that, is John Gans published a piece a week ago where he argues that the reason why Kamala lost basically is because they use this corporate work vibe and language, like HR language, corporate colors, phrases, values. And like, Peter Thiel says that the COVID ended the 20th century, that the 20th century work is over. Like people, if you look at the actual numbers, this is no longer how Americans work. What do you think about that? And how much do you think, we talked before we hit the record button, we talked about whether we are becoming the establishment and what that means. Do you think that pathless people are becoming the establishment? And if so, what does that mean?
Well, to answer that quickly, I think we're still many years from becoming the establishment, right? I have like very little formal power, but I do think that comment about the Democratic Party communicating in a very corporate speak is something that's really interesting. Now, I think that as an explanatory variable for the election, I think that's probably a little overdone. I think it's just I think a lot of explanations of like who wins elections is a lot of bullshit. But and mostly I would dismiss that because both parties in the US are big corporate vibe political parties. The political establishment is basically aligned completely with full-time employment, right? They might be aligned somewhat maybe with like big like small business owners who like make a lot of money, but they're not really aligned with like self-employed people like me. And so I think this is a really interesting thing though to watch. I think over the next 10 years you will see one party. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the Democrats in the US shift toward embracing sort of like starting your own business, self-employment, right? I think there's something like deeply historical and American about that. And this period of like, I mean, even the Republicans tie like hard work to like hard work at a job for 40 years, right? Hard work in like these dying industries like manufacturing that aren't coming back employment wise, or coal, right? Or oil and gas, or the
It's not even
defense.
20th century, it's like 19th century, right?
Right. And so I don't think we have a good answer politically or even like narrative wise, like a US grand narrative about like the role of work in our lives. Um, but yeah, I think this like put your head down, shut up, play by the rules, and you'll be rewarded. Like no one buys that anymore, especially young people. Like I don't think people realize how much Gen Z has shifted on this. Like they're losing faith in the institutions. I talk to college dropouts all the time. I talk to early career dropouts all the time. And it's just much different than my peers and how I was thinking at the time.
What are they saying? Like, what are some of the Gen Z themes that you pick up from? I mean, you're talking to the internet, right? So it's a really kind of wide sweep of demographics.
Yeah, just going after things they care about, taking more responsibility for their path, capturing more of the upside of their efforts and ingenuity, creativity and not having to get paid for it, not trusting that things will work out. And um, yeah, I think there's a lot of optimism there because on the other side of like screw the system is an acceptance of a certain amount of responsibility that I don't think previous generations have taken. And the elder millennials are sort of this tweener generation. Like I sort of have some friends that you might categorize as like aesthetically boomer, whereas like I might be aesthetically like Gen Z. And so I do
Like Barry
think
Wise, who is aesthetically boomer, who is a millennial with the boomer aesthetics.
I mean, they're all like my business school classmates, right? All like I like to say I'm the poorest 1% of my business school class, which is probably true. Like that's probably not even a bold claim. But most of them are working full time, making a lot of money, have like fancy houses, sending their kids to school, commuting most days or at least 3 days a week, sort of like doing the path like my parents did. And I've opted out off of that. I don't really see a path in the short term to like owning a home where I'd want to live in a financially viable way. I'm not like stacking tons of money for retirement. I'm sort of like muddling through, but I'm having the time of my life and like really prioritizing other stuff.
I'm the same. I mean, I immigrated 4 times in my life, right? For a variety of different reasons. And yeah, I was buying this couch for 2 months, thinking what couch to buy because it's so expensive. It's like I'm not used to spending. I mean,
Yeah.
company, yeah, of course, like salaries and stuff, but on myself, like I don't normally like splash out this kind of money. And I was like, this is such pressure. Oh my God, what if it's not good? And yeah, uh, millennials are becoming more Gen Z in this sense. But I spent a good chunk of 2023, and I don't know if this came up during our podcast together, but I was really at the time very conflicted about this. And it was a hard time to kind of go through this whole period. Like the having lived in Brussels, and I was there, I got stuck there because of the pandemic. So I actually spent way like a double amount of time there than I had wanted. And you're basically with normies, right? The entire EU establishment is normies. And, my school friends that I had known to be exceptionally voracious readers, original thinkers, my best friend who's like an economic genius. I mean, she passed the competitive exam for the EU in like the top percent. Like she's a fucking genius. And you see these, millennials settle into these lives that are not that are yeah, but I don't want to say they are like boomers because the boomers I know are way more original and they do the drugs and sleep around and do like way more interesting things than millennials cosplaying as boomers. And that was just so sad. Like I left Brussels with this sense of deep grief, actually. Like I was grieving these people. Of course, I know that this is a temporary situation, that you can't really be stuck in an untenable situation for long enough because something or somebody will break. But in a life where there's such rigidity that the only way out is by drastic measures and divorce and nervous breakdowns and running out into the jungle in Peru or something. And so it's not really the pathos part that I was meditating on, but like, why entrap ourselves? Like you have to be we have to build our lives on commitments. I do that, you do that, but like choose your commitments for yourself. Like a commitment that somebody else chooses for yourself is going to never feel personal enough for you to have the kind of allowing flexibility around it when you're like, I'm in love with the problem, not the solution. I'm happy to, experiment, change, iterate until I find that. I just find that a very. It makes me worried about certain people to not.
Yeah,
You have the same with ideas, right? Like the reason why some people you can't argue with about an idea is because it's not their own. So they don't or it's not their own belief. They just picked it up as a kind of identity badge. And so they don't have the path of argumentation where you can go back and forth to discuss without them kind of shutting down or becoming too defensive. I feel the same with life choices. What has been your experience? I mean, just as an elderly millennial to an elderly millennial.
Yeah, I think we often overestimate the degree to which the past was more experimental. I think it was actually less. I mean, John Stuart Mill writes in On Liberty that it's like culture is going to calcify if we don't have more people experimenting with how they're living. And he said, like, we need far more experiments in living. And this is like 1850s, I think. And after World War II, you have William Wright writing in The Organization Man. He's like, these young people are so weird. Like our generation used to leap into the real world in the 20s and 30s when things were crazy. Now they go to like these very boring lives in organizations. And so I think there are like waves, right? I think if you can just like solve your money problem completely by becoming an organization man, I think that is like I think that's actually great. Like, I think that should be celebrated as a cultural innovation. Like those people don't start riots either on the other side of it, right? They're not like remixing culture and pushing ideas forward, but they're also not causing chaos and like doing a lot of crime and causing a lot of chaos in society. So I do think like some of these things are pretty great and like people can find them a lot of meaning from work in those jobs. Um, but I do
If it's an
think,
elective thing, if I choose, it's like
yeah,
you want to join a monastery and live a celibate and life in poverty and obedience, great. I will like march for your right to do that. But being sent there or being kind of gaslit, that's a very different kind of level of using one's freedom, right?
well, yeah, I mean, the existentialists talked about this, right? I think Sartre talked about like the false self, right? Like the false self is like showing up as a waiter, but like pretending to be the waiter and not fully owning that identity. Um, I think that's the trap, right? I think in our current reality, a lot of people are aware that they've done some devil's bargain or like are trading off some of their freedom. And I think that is where it becomes extremely painful. That's where it became extremely painful for me. I felt trapped. I felt stuck. I had to escape. And despite feeling some of those things, I spent years continuing to stay on that path. Um, because of like my own self immobilization. And so I think a lot of where I write is like with a lot of compassion about this. I sort of wrote The Pathless Path as a deprogramming manual. And so I have found that it's very powerful for people, but it's my painful step by step, like several years long journey to like stepping into my own actual path and responsibility for it.
I love the deprogramming manual idea, and I completely agree with that. And I can see the kind of questions that people find you with and how many thoughts you're giving to people. I mean, we did multiple Interact salons together. You co-hosted the Kevin Kelly one, and I mean, people are grateful toward you, and you are, and people change their own lives, but you help them change their lives. And that's kind of insane. That's also what I love most about Interintellect. You see all these marriages happening, and now that second baby was just born in Interintellect, third is on
That's
the
so
way,
cool.
where the parents met in Interintellect, and it's just wonderful to observe and see people flourish financially, professionally, in their love lives, with their family lives, move around in the world. You kind of want to be a catalyst of that stuff, and give the. There's no freedom without safety, right? Like, where is the resting point? What is the community? What is the community of ideas and ideals that you can retreat into when you feel too lonely?
And I think that this is something I think about a lot is like the commons of the idea space. And I really take it seriously to like protect the commons, both with how I engage socially and try to like be productive and a positive voice. Um, Mostly because one is just like I am dependent on this ecosystem being strong and growing. Um, and two, I think it matters. I think like for me, it does come down to like hope in the future to inject the theme of the podcast. But for me, like freedom, freedom to be an asshole or freedom to be a fool or a jerk is like not freedom. Freedom is supposed to be to become a larger version of yourself or to become a deeper version of yourself, right? And I think that's the sort of freedom I really try to inject in like everything I'm doing. And therefore, I spend a lot of time doing stuff that doesn't clearly make money, that I'm doing for fun, that I just feel like is a good way to spend my time. And that leads to all sorts of challenges of like, how am I going to fund this life over the next 10 to 15 years? But I'm basically just willing to um, leave money on the table and burn opportunities and even like run down my savings to commit to this path because ultimately, like I just get a lot from that commitment. It's rewarding in and of itself. And I think this is the hardest thing to explain to people that um, are like not super curious about these paths. But when you're in it, it's like it's so obvious that like I wouldn't go back now. And I think I'd have dozens of friends like fighting me if I was like, hey, I'm taking a full-time job at GE.
You would be the traitor. This is so interesting. I love the yeah. I mean, you know that I do spend a lot of time thinking about the commons, and I have this theory, having spent the first part of my childhood during the last years of communism in Eastern Europe, and then basically the 90s in this kind of weird twilight zone of the post-communist period. And one thing that I noticed with a lot of interest as a kind of budding linguist at the time is the difference between private language and public. Václav Havel famously writes about this in The Power of the Powerless, because you can't separate these two things. Like, people think that, oh, if there is a dictatorship, if there's, some kind of censorship going on, I will just speak the truth with my friends and my family privately, and then I would just go outside and lie and do the motions, go through the lies. And what you notice eventually, and this is, I think, what Americans don't really understand about illiberal societies, is that this is not so. This is not how humans work. Because what happens is that first of all, you kind of sow the seeds of distrust in both arenas, and you really become a world without common knowledge, right? There's nowhere to double check, and everybody runs free with their own assumptions about what other people know, but there's nowhere to check. And so through like the years, you enter this crazy world of gaslighting where you kind of take the public lie home, and it infects the family, it affects the relationships, right? You can't virtuously feed your son with the food that you made in a non-virtuous way, right? Like, what are you passing down there? What does that make of your relationship with him, et cetera, et cetera? And you can't really convincingly lie constantly in the outside world without either developing a very serious kind of mental health condition or starting to believe some of it. And what I always felt was missing in those worlds is the semi-public space, right? Not commons in the British park sense, but commons in the sense that, yes, the third place, semi-public, right? Why do we need the third place? Because that's where you align the private language and the public truth. You can check what other people are thinking about, what they are doing, how they use words, what those things mean. And you can pick up on patterns of what are the kind of common problems, what is the trend. And then you can make a far more informed decision as an individual. Do I want to participate in this or not? So the fact that we did not have these spaces for a long time, and now we are, whatever is happening in politics right now, I think for me, that's hope. And everybody can create the semi-public space. Just invite your neighbors for a street party. Like, you go to Brooklyn in the summer and everybody's sitting outside. They close down the streets. They bring out the tables. Talk to your neighbor. It's amazing.
Yeah. And I wonder if I think this is sort of something that is shifting rapidly from the industrial era to the internet age. So you have older people who get news from like mass media, right? Like MSNBC or Fox News in the US. And then they just they're often repeating lies. Like, everyone's repeating lies. And there's no correct party. They're both just so much propaganda and lies. And
no correcting. There's no correcting.
Right.
You have to grind against the other truth to figure out what is in the middle, right?
And so then people take those into private spaces, and like you say, they destroy connection, human connection, family connection, because ultimately a lot of those things don't matter at the family level. And yeah, there isn't a good way to actually talk about and explore these things before the internet. Now with the internet, you have all these third spaces, like small communities, places like the Internet Intellect, even small niches on things like Twitter. And I think this is why I am critical of Twitter while also still being on there, is I think people are really caught up right now in right-wing propaganda. and talking points. And a lot of it's bullshit. And a lot of the bullshit gets repeated. And I don't think people realize the negative externality of that behavior. Like it's really fun to get caught up in that, but you're polluting a potential space where ideas can flourish, right? And so I think this is ultimately probably the challenge of the next 10 years is how do you leave spaces open that don't become a race to the bottom to all this like collective lying.
And I mean, Interact has been doing this for almost 6 years. You know, we had zero toxicity at any of our events, which is kind of insane and beautiful. And all we do is real name, real face, you pay for it.
Yeah.
There's no incentive. Like you're not going to, it's like going to a dinner party. You're not going to misbehave because what are you going to gain? Like you're not going to gain followers. There will be no traction. You will not be a cool guy. You know, you will just like be kicked out and not invited again. So just setting up the incentives a little bit, I think is indispensable for building a good search space. Like you want it to be like.
Do you think these public spaces like Twitter, Tumblr, like do you think like 2010s era social media is just like over and it's just going to be smaller hidden niches?
Right now, the internet is WhatsApp groups, right? Which is really bad. Because if I restarted my life basically on Twitter, right? It was
right
2017, and
me too.
Yeah, I was completely broke. My entire life had fallen apart. I was very depressed about it, had no idea what I was going to be doing. I was writing a lot, reading a lot, working in, low-level jobs as a new immigrant. And there was this moment when I was like, and I had a Twitter account before, but I never really used it in a constructive way. And then I was like sitting on my computer and I thought, all I have is myself. I don't have anything else. I have my body, I have my mind, I have whatever I know, whatever I can do with my brain. Where can I take this? Where this might be enough? Let's see. And then I went on Twitter and, it was kind of life-changing. Like the first time that Interact even kind of came up as an idea, the community, the friendships, arising from ideas, the access to the really interesting thinkers. Because before that, it was like whoever happens to be there is who you have to make do. And some people were very lucky because they were in Vienna when the Vienna Circle was there. But if you were not, sorry. And for me, the fact that I could at least, like this is Visa Verasami's whole thing, like reply to things to grow your Twitter followings, like have an interesting response and people will follow you back. And for me, that was absolutely mind-blowing. If I were starting right now and I was not in some of these WhatsApp groups already, it would be really hard. So that's what
I agree.
Private place, right? You need semi-public spaces. But I think we will get out of this at some point. Like somebody must build something that is neither Blue Sky nor Twitter. I don't know. What are the Gen Z people doing? What are you noticing?
I don't know. I sort of feel a bit lost right now with how I'm creating and sharing ideas in public. I have found I really love writing books, so I think that's going to be the anchor for me. But I think this is really an open question. And this is where I think continuing to ask questions is helpful. I have no idea like what my day-to-day looks like. Am I still going to be sharing ideas on social media platforms 5 years from now? It feels like we're going to be in completely new territory. I think this is also why I've been leaning more into my community. We have about 400 people in my community. And as more people come, like the conversation gets better and there does seem to be something growing. I don't know like what the next evolution of that looks like. But like I do want to support people to share ideas in the public conversation because ultimately I think it matters. And this is why I still do share in places like X and other social media platforms because if I'm telling people, hey, you should put your voice out there and be a positive voice, like I need to actually do that too. And so that's something I really argue for. And I think something worth noting is my model of this is like consuming is the worst place to be if you're on social media, only consuming. If you can also create, you can turn that consumption into a really productive time that feeds your creative capacity. But most people don't do it because they look at the internet and they go, look at all those loud people shouting. They're so annoying. I don't want to be like them. But because those people have that voice in their head, I can guarantee, I'm saying to you listening, you are not going to shout because you already have the voice telling you not to shout, right? And so we need more of those people that are saying, I don't want to create and share ideas in public because I don't want to be annoying, right? You should actually share because you're already worried about being annoying, so you won't be annoying. And plus, people are going to think you're annoying anyway, so you might as well just do it.
This is some very good advice, guys. Go out there, go out there. The best way to make friends is writing pieces. Somebody will read that and realize that you are soulmates and will reach out and you will be best friends forever. This is how life works in the 21st century. Before our listeners or viewers joined us, we were talking a little bit about your wonderful wife, Angie, who is also a writer, and that you mentioned that she's using social media a little bit differently. Do you want to, if you're happy to speak to it a little bit, I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah. And so her journey's been really fascinating. So, chapter 4 of my most recent book, Good Work, is all about how our relationship has evolved with her and my work journeys being at different points and how we've handled that and how it's shifted for her and I after having a child. And it's been really interesting to sort of see her journey because she has very different ways of connecting with people. I love connecting with people. I could go from one social event to another one and like just keep talking to people about ideas as long as it's like stuff that's interesting and energizing. She can't do that much. So I just make the friends for us. And then she has found more of a voice in Chinese. So she was actually the first fitness podcast in Taiwan. She launched it in 2019. And Taiwan's like always just like a few years behind the US of things taking off. But yeah, she had like a ton of followers. She did that for a few years. She then shifted into just talking about random stuff. She's written in Chinese and she's now writing her book in Chinese. And then has also found an outlet through Threads, which is basically the Twitter of Taiwan now. And yeah, she's been posting a lot of deep reflections and connecting with more people. I think she's still trying to figure out how do you, because she's not like me, where I'm just like, hey, let's jump on a call, let's be friends, like, let's get involved and do these things. She's still trying to figure out how do you actually translate a following into like people that want to support and grow her work. So yeah, she's still trying to figure that out as well. And it's also just interesting. We're both creating in different languages, um, but we're going to co-write. We're going to co-translate her memoir to English and self-publish that together. So that's going to be a really fun project. Hopefully next year.
That's amazing. Angie's wonderful. And it's so good that you are aware of these differences and you use them in like a gentle and constructive way to kind of strengthen each other. I think that sounds like a good partnership. You met Angie, I think, when you were in Asia, right? When you lived there.
Through the internet, through Tinder.
Of course, of course. Was there something that you learned in Asia about the good life and what matters, how people live, that was in contrast with your US life? And did it feed into the Pathless Buzz book, the Good Work book? Do you see yourself as a cosmopolitan these days?
Yeah, so my experience moving to Asia is really interesting. I was not in like expat mode, going to bars and partying with all foreigners or just like trying to teach English or anything like that. I basically went there without any work and didn't really have any plan. And I would just like wake up and spend time by myself and go to coffee shops and read in the park and write a little. And the most intense thing I realized was I wouldn't say intense, it was sort of like a release, was the letting go of the scripts and stories in my head that had a grip on me. And so you've probably experienced this emigrating multiple times now. Um, I think being out of the
Even
US
just
for several,
traveling, even just
yeah,
traveling, right? Like that's why people should travel. Like you have to step out of your own hallucination.
yeah, take that, Agnes Callard.
I love you, Agnes, except this one piece.
I love her too. I quoted her book Aspiration and Length in my first book. But yeah, travel was like a powerful psychotechnology for me because it gave me this permission to release myself from the stories in my head. And I'm in this foreign culture where I can't speak the language, I can't read the language. I can't even try to read Chinese when I first arrived. And so I didn't know what people around me thought. And I that was true. Like that was true. Now I know what they think. Like I'm married to a Taiwanese person and I know how our family operates and thinks. So it's the allure is a little less now. But still, when I go there, I have the feeling of being lost. And I think the feeling of being lost is something people need to experience more in the modern world. Um, Nobody gets lost anymore because of Google Maps, right? So even like literally getting lost, no one ever gets lost. But being lost in Taiwan was it was this surreal feeling of like being lost and found at the same time. It was like, oh, this is some like deep reality of or deep truth of existence that I am supposed to experience. We are not meant to know what we're doing. And so it helped me connect with this something deeper. And um, yeah, it also kind of gave me permission to myself of, yeah, there are no stories or scripts in your head. You grew up with those because you were born in the US and like everyone worked in full-time jobs and like the economy ripped. So of course everyone thinks that's the best way to spend your adult life, right? You have a completely different experience. You couldn't like count on those things where you grew up. And so those starting conditions can be so strong. And um, I don't think like blowing up your life as early as possible is the most important. I think the most important is finding the off ramps, right? The off ramps such that you can reinvent throughout your life. For you, is at 30 years old. For me, it was 33 years old. And so I think um, making those off ramps visible and giving people stories and metaphors to help them make sense of that journey, that's like the most interesting thing for me. I'm just so fascinated with that.
Do you want to speak to the Good Work book a little bit? Let's pitch it to people. Like if you haven't read this book, why you should straight from Paul, why you should buy this book.
Yeah. So I think I love just like putting my book out there without a launch plan because I like to find out what the book means to other people. I'm so connected to it and it's so personal and such a transformative experience for me to write a book that I love hearing from people. And the number one thing I've heard from people is like, now I read this book, I know what my good work is and I'm moving toward it now. Like I am accelerating plans, I'm taking action, I'm more serious about X. I actually had somebody cancel a podcast with me last week because they were like, Paul, I read your book and I realized like podcasting is not my good work, so I'm shutting it down. I was like, this is the
Talk
best
about a self-own.
endorsement, but such a, I loved it. I was like so happy
It's when we
because
like make people realize in interns like that they just want to write a book and then they stop coming to salons because they are writing their books. And I'm like, oh, I'm happy for you, but oh no.
yeah, and I mean that's that's part of my challenge. Well, mostly like having a kid. I just don't have as much time for intellect anymore. But yeah, it's some of the different opportunities and like things I enjoy. It makes it hard. But what I found and same thing happened after I was talking about the pathless path. The more conversations I was having to people, I kept coming back to this story of like they were like, how could you take this leap? I'm like, you don't understand. In the first year and a half of my life, I slowly stripped away everything. I became lost. And in the lostness and being in Taiwan, I found this incredible connection with work. then I found people doing this kind of work. And I was like, screw it. I'm going to spend the rest of my life writing for free for fun, no matter what, because I finally found a connection, a place where I can feel alive, a place where I can continue on this path. And that's everything to me. And so my idea was, how do I capture that energy in a book? And so I think somebody messaged me a couple weeks ago. They were like, your book is like a warm hug.
Oh my God, that's amazing. I love that. It's like
I can
choose
find
your adventure,
the
choose your
exact
own
quote.
road.
This,
Oh yeah, tell me the quote.
yeah. Um, I, I can't find. I'll find it. Well,
All right.
right.
It's like like you will, whatever, however you shape your life, however good your life is, you will have problems, right? This is kind of the Esther Perel playbook for choosing your spouse. Choose a problem you're happy with. You have
Yeah,
to don't make a choice until you know
I
yourself
love that.
to know what manner of suffering will be acceptable to you in the future, right? It's the same with startups. Like I always say to people, like I have been sometimes very, very down running InterIntellect, but it's a very different kind of down from before.
I love this.
Even the darkest night of the soul is better than some of the happier moments before because you have this kind of, you're in the right place. And it's the same with like, where do you live, right? Like, I love New York. I came here first time 4 years ago. I knew that this is the place where I was going to live because it's like a no-brainer. You know, it's like I'm home. And so you see people, you know, all the things that bothered me in other cities. I'm like, here, I'm in New York, so I don't care. Oh, so there were rats running in front
You
of me.
need that attitude in here.
Whatever. Yeah, it's kind of wild, but there's no rhyme or reason to this. You have to accept who you are in this sense and just be like, if I try to fight myself all the time, then that will take up all my energy. And if I kind of surrender to my nature, then I can start collaborating with the world because this constant, you know, energy that had been, you know, spent on something else is now coming back to me and I can use it for something else.
I love this. So the way I talk about this is a shift from bad hard to good hard. And so bad hard is like doing things you hate because you think you're supposed to do things you hate, right? And so this is like the suffer Ponzi scheme of the industrial era. I suffered, so you should suffer too, right? Like what makes you think you don't get to work a job, right? A lot of people's parents say that to them.
Hi,
And
father,
so
beat me and look what it made me.
right, exactly.
Okay.
Oh, I'm so worried about my kids not learning how to struggle. And right, it's like you're missing the point because there's another kind of hard, which is the good hard. The good hard is what I experience, what you experience in a startup or what I experience in a book. Like as I'm trying to like pull together the ideas, it's so like, why is this so freaking hard? Like why is this so like painful? But it's so delightful too. And it's like the hard I'm choosing. It's like, this is so much better than like trying to please a client in consulting. And so choosing that. And then more broadly for my life, the puzzle of figuring out where to live, how to fund it, how to design my life, how to balance work with family, how to have a kid, how to manage my work, Angie's work, all this, like it's super fun for me. And so if you hate all these things, you should not follow my path. That'd be a terrible decision. And so, yeah, I think this is why I try to like just communicate those things clearly to people.
Watch yourself when you can do anything. Look at what you're doing in that time. Those are the things that you want to do. That is who you are. And find a life for that person, right? You can't, the 20th century way of working tells you choose a life or have your parents choose a life for you or your social environment, and then spend your life breaking yourself into that mold, whoever you were at the beginning, right? The entire, like the whole like office outfit, this whole like uniformization. Whereas in reality, what happens is figure out who you are. Don't make a moral judgment about it. Like there's no good and bad. Like we are different types of people. You can only flourish in anything, if you respect this person that you find. I will give you an example. I grew up in a show business family, right? Show business works very similarly to, for instance, athletic careers in terms of the general daily kind of the cadence of the day. So you wake up, you're super introverted, you're like in recovery mode in the morning, you do all the admin and the kind of intake in the morning. Then you start coming to life and you start doing the meetings, right, in the middle of the day. And as you get toward the end of the day, you usually have the performance or the competition or whatever. There is a kind of climax, and then there's the calm down, and you kind of usually go to bed later if you can help it, et cetera, et cetera. And nobody in my entire life, even when I worked in film, really allowed me to live like that until I started building InterIntellect during the pandemic, when I really had the whole day. And at the beginning, I almost had no employees either. So I didn't have to conform to other people's time zones and families and whatever they were doing in their lives. So I could just like go wild as myself in my own cadence. And I became so productive, Paul. I literally built the company.
It's amazing, right?
Just because they let me do my own like internal rhythm. That is not even internal in the sense like it comes from how I grew up, but the internalized rhythm. And I'm like, the factory model is bullshit. It works for some people. They will be very successful, but they are not more successful because they are smarter or more competent or better humans. It's just they happen to have the same kind of circadian rhythm as what this random job demands. And for me, that's mind-blowing. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I think so before I had a kid, I was able to fully lean into this. I still lean into it a lot more than most other parents, I think, but I basically just never had a plan for a single day for more than 5 years. And so my wife was the same too. We rarely had stuff in the schedule. Every day was up for grabs. So if it's sunny and we wake up and we decide to go for a hike, we'd go. Right. And when inspiration struck, I'd write. So sometimes I'd lose myself for a few days and just write like a maniac. It was awesome. It was all on my terms. And then over a few years, I start to notice, oh, there's natural seasonality to my life. Right. And so I started expanding my frame for how I thought about work. I think a lot of people think about work through a work day or a work week. I think if you're doing purely creative work, that is a terrible frame. I think you need to expand to work month, work years, and work decades, right? Like it's really a radical question to think about like, what is my ideal work decade? Like it's so, I love this question.
This is how you build a startup. I don't know if you've ever done
Exactly.
but like one of the worst things that happens to you when you're on happened to you when you're on Tinder is like every message, at least that I was getting.
I met my wife on Tinder.
Oh, every message I was getting when I was doing it was, "Oh, are you looking forward to the weekend on like a Tuesday?" And I'm like,
yeah, this
no.
This
and also,
why
you
I
spend
left
your
New
life
York.
looking forward to the. It was not in New York; it was in London. But I was like, you spend your
fair.
entire life looking forward to the weekend. Why do you have this life? Like this sounds horrible. Like I would never like no. Like my weekends are awesome. That's like or my weeks are awesome, and my weekends like I don't have a weekend. What's a weekend? So it's just like
yeah, I agree. It's this escapism, and I'm so glad I'm not in that mindset anymore. I used to think the same way.
People are somewhere where they don't want to be if they are looking for these like 2-day period. That's like a very small chunk of the weekend. You're not happy in the other chunk.
So the reason I really liked Angie at first is she was about to leave her job, and she called me one morning. Is like, I'm not going to work today. Let's go for a hike or a bike ride. And so I just love that she was skipping work. And so yeah, we've sort of like designed our life around that ethos, and still to this day, it's like we still take time and be like, oh, let's just like go for a walk because it's nice out and we can like go hang out with our daughter. And yeah, I think that freedom to do things when you want and at your natural like pace and rhythm really like my resentment level of any work I do is near zero. like every day just feels like a day. There's no like weekend or weekday. Now, my weekends are more blocked off, mostly because most people hang out on the weekends. But yeah, every day just kind of flows together.
But this also means that days are much richer, right? Like I don't have a sense of time anymore because in a startup, a life happens in one day. I was urging my team to ship something faster, and I was like, "But 2 weeks, 2 weeks," and my colleague was like, "No, that was 3 days ago." And I'm like, "Oh," but for me, 3 days, it's such a long period, and so many things happen. And I think that comes with the flow, the enjoyment. Like you just have way more things happening to you when you're enjoying it because you're welcoming and kind of facilitating and precipitating things to happen. But before we run out of time, I really want to go back a little bit to the Good Work book. You wrote this fabulous piece on the sorry state of contemporary publishing, and you give some really good advice to people. I want to start from a different angle. If you had published the Good Work book with a traditional publishing, like guide us through that. Like,
Impossible.
tell me
I
the
wouldn't have done
screenplay.
it.
It's somebody like for, and they want it. How would that have happened? And what would have been the kind of financial and timeline implications of that?
Right. So I might have made more money if I'd done it with traditional, and the book might be more successful, but it wouldn't be the same book, right? So the timeline's totally different. For nonfiction books, you have to write a proposal. Often people spend like 3 to 4 months writing a proposal, and then you get an agent, and then agent helps you break through the gates of the big publishers. The big publishers will then bid on you based on like your size of an audience and stuff and quality of the proposal. Then you write the book. Then your book gets edited and shaped and defined by committees, right? And so I spent 10 years working with committees, and I just don't want to work with committees. I'm too disagreeable with my creative work. And I literally won't compromise anything. Like I won't compromise word choices, color choices, etc. And then there's like a 9 to 12 month gap between you finishing the book and you publishing it. And so the reason for the gap is because the ultimate customer of a big publisher is retailers and distributors. And so distributors like Amazon and retailers like Barnes and Noble, Waterstones in the UK, whatever retailer. And so, yeah, this has always been true. The number one share of a profit of a total book has pretty much always been the retailer. This was true in the 1800s, and this is true now. And the reason is because they're the closest to the customer. This is true in almost every industry. The closer you are to the customer, you own demand, and you can extract more profits, right? And so everything is downstream from this. The publisher makes the second most profits for traditional publishers. So majority of profits are the publisher and the retailer. Therefore, you are not the customer as the author, unless you are a superstar, right? And then you can demand some stuff. But the entire business model operates with you not being the core customer. And so the model still works great. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I sort of think the debate between should I do traditional or self-publish is sort of a fake debate that people just get excited about. Um, Ultimately, I think like self-publishing and the ability to directly work with distributors like Amazon and Ingram Spark is amazing. It expands the pool of ideas. Someone like me, 30 years ago would have no business writing a book because I didn't grow up in the right families, have the right connections, etc. Um, and so it's just this incredible opportunity. And I think like I don't think like anything is right, wrong, bad, or otherwise. I think this industry is going to completely change. Like the internet has reshaped the transaction costs of every industry. It will do this to publishing too. It's just when and how, I don't know. Right.
You mentioned in a tweet recently that you want or you're considering starting a publishing house because as you were talking, I'm really like pathless path retailer when like an aggregator of all self-published books. But you were talking about a possible publishing house. Was it a joke? Is this real?
Okay. So if you just said, I have launched Inter Intellect Publishing, congrats. You are now a publisher. There are no legal requirements to be a publisher other than just literally coming up with a name and then just writing it in text boxes where you upload files to be printed around the world.
I love this.
And so
basically,
Pathless
you can just do
Publishing,
things.
Right. Pathless Publishing exists because I decided it exists. I typed it in the box and I attributed my ISBNs to Pathless Publishing. Now, I did file paperwork. I basically filed a doing business as in Texas for like 10 years. It costs like $30. And so legally, I can operate as Pathless Publishing now. We are open for business. My idea, however, though, is not to build a business. It's a terrible business. It's really hard to scale. My idea is basically like creative permission. So like if the idea of publishing with Pathless Publishing and having that like pseudo permission from me would inspire people to put more ideas out in the book, I'd be happy to like let someone use my name to put on their book. And I don't want to take anything from that. Right. Maybe there'd be some sort of like paid coaching model where I work with people. But I am thinking more about this in the future, especially with helping Angie with her book. I really like book coaching. I have a very strong point of view around writing personal stories around big ideas. And so I'd like to lean into that over the next couple of years, but I don't really know where it leads. But yeah, it's something I'm playing with for sure.
I'm writing a book now, so maybe I will take you up on that and get some coaching. Running a book while running a company is a
That's
challenge.
impressive. I don't know how I could do that.
Yeah, it's very slowly. In the last section of my podcast, and I know that you listen to a couple of episodes, you know that I like to ask people to kind of fantasize about 2030 and tell us something about that period and the people there and what they think seems now obvious about 2024 that we were not yet aware of. But in your case, I would kind of add a twist to it. I feel like you and I were both working. We both have the kind of intellectual itch. We want to have a good intellectual life. It is as important to us as any other part of life. Is important to people. In my busiest periods, I feel almost like I'm suffocating. I'm just a business person. I don't have an intellectual life. It's almost like a thirst. Like I need it to exist because I just don't feel like a complete person. And I'm always interested in what this need is. Where does this need come from? Especially if you grow up in families where it grossly varies from one person to the other. Where does it come from? Why is it that one kid will be obsessed with the bookcase and the other not, or the other kid's not? So to me, that's always a really interesting aspect to it. The other thing that I've been reflecting on, I've just been to Hereticon in Miami, and this was my second time there. The first one was 2.5 years ago. And I was very tired when I was going. I had just moved to this apartment in New York. I was very overworked with InterIntellect. And I was almost hesitating not to go. And I was like, oh, I will go. And I made a deal with myself. I was like, I'm going to go, but just to have fun. I'm not going to network. I'm not going to sell. I'm not going to aggressively try to dive into ideas and find out everything about them. I'm just going to go and hang out with the people I love and have conversations that I enjoy. And what was really weird about I just did this for 3.5 days. I was just hanging out with people I like, just going to things that really interested me. And I ended up with a far more intellectually enriching experience, but orders of magnitude greater than when I do it rationally. And I was like, did I make a mistake in my entire life until now to try to separate the kind of self-driven learning of my life and just the kind of hedonistic enjoyment of other people and their ideas? Obviously, you enjoy certain people because they are interesting and smart and have good ideas. What hope is there, do you think, that people actually ask these questions? And how will our intellectual life, elderly millennials, Gen Z, how will it look in a few years? Do you see a bigger trend here?
I think what you're hitting on is the bigger trend. Like you went to that conference where people are selecting around curiosity for ideas. And so I think there are going to be more nodes of that in the world. I don't know in which form. Like maybe they'll be organized by self organizing AI agents that put on conferences or send people plane tickets. Um, but yeah, I think my journey was ignoring that part of me for so many years. I think luckily in consulting, there are a lot of curious people. So I was able to have like these one-off friendships where I could just like talk about ideas and they wouldn't get triggered by some like idea I'm just trying to like work through and make sense of. Um, and then yeah, as I started to write online in the mid 2010s, I started to find more people. And I feel so lucky now. I think, especially in the US, this is a really good time for ideas, especially for like younger people. We're not allowed to run the country yet, but eventually we might be allowed to try our good ideas into the world. Um, and I think that's just increasing. I think if you meet young people now, their depth of knowledge around interesting ideas is so much deeper than mine. I remember running out of stuff to read on the internet. In 2003, 2004, 2005, I'm using Google Reader and I would just like tab through and like I'd literally run out of stuff to read. And I'd be like, okay, the internet's done for the day. Right. And so that's basically just like untapped curiosity throughout like my entire young life. And now the people that are hyper curious are just going deeper, right? They're reading much wider and deeper. And so maybe not on average, but the extremes, it's just going to be a lot more people. And I think one interesting thing I'm seeing is the age span of people is just much wider. Like, I think we're going to be in rooms where, like, you're with an 18-year-old and 40-year-olds and 70-year-olds, deeply curious about these things. And yeah, I think that is the hopeful, optimistic side of like generational wars and political wars is like people can come together around ideas they care about.
So much. I mean, Tyler Cowen talks about how smart kids are. Like, this is
Yeah.
maybe first real internet native generation, the first time in history where the children are so much smarter than we are. And this will continue. Like their curiosity and their interdisciplinarity are just astonishing. Like there has never been anything like this. This is, I mean, we were smart with Wikipedia, right? But like I'm observing myself using Claude and ChatGPT all day long. Like what I was doing on the floor as a child with the encyclopedia, I do that in conversation at this like super speed. And I'm 40 years old. That's a very different plasticity. I will get smarter as well. But like imagine a 14-year-old. Like that's just incredible. And the other thing I want to say, and this is like for our listeners and viewers, I too, everybody sometimes has this inhibition. Like, I don't want to reach out to people and tell them about my ideas because they will be annoyed, they will block me, blah, blah. No, they will fucking love it. Send cold emails. Like,
Yes.
I was on this podcast recently. Reach out to people. The worst thing that will happen is they will ignore you, or more likely, they will just forget about you. They will want to get back to you with something, and then life will happen. These are not bad outcomes. And if they forget about you, you can email them again because they totally forgot you already. And you can just
Yes, that's very
yourself
true.
again. It's great. And I just like, people need to do
But
this.
I would add to that I do get a lot of random emails, but I don't get a lot of deeply curious emails. And so if you do have like deep thinking around ideas, like I want to connect with you and find you. And yeah, I think a lot of people are surprised when I'm like reading some random person will write about work and they're like, I can't believe you read my stuff. I'm like, you don't understand. I'm super curious about this. Like I want to meet people like you. I want to find the new ideas. Um, and yeah, it's very true. It's funny. I was reading Marginal Revolution for probably 15 years before I emailed Tyler. Um, and he replies back in like 30 seconds. And it's like, oh, that's crazy. And yeah, I sent him one of my articles in 2019, Boomer Blockade, and it went like semi-viral. Yeah, it's just wild. And it makes you realize, oh, he's just like me, just probably slightly higher IQ.
I would challenge you on that probably, but nobody's like Tyler. Yeah, but there's this enormous power to approaching people who are obsessed with ideas, right? I think what people are worried about when it comes to putting themselves forward is when there's a kind of incongruent situation between what this person is about and myself. I mean, I've had, and I think, everybody who has been building their own thing will tell you how much rejection they are facing in life, like having a good, or at least publicly good, relationship with rejection is kind of a prerequisite. But the older I get, the more I notice that almost everybody who rejects me are just like in a different game.
Yeah.
So you think that they're in the same game as you are, or that they have the same kind of, cost function, whereas in reality, they are just like going after something very different. And in that sense, they are kind of doing you a favor.
Yeah. Or it's like, I mean, also you just get rejected so many times that like it's just not a big deal. I applied for Emergent Ventures grant for like a new like hardcover book I'm working on, and like they rejected me pretty quick, and like I'm like, okay, that's fine. It
I got
probably like
rejected
doesn't.
from YC 5 times. I was rejected,
Yeah, but like
and then I
it,
became friends with Matt Clifford, so it doesn't matter.
but it also getting rejected is great because then I have to ask the question, oh, do I want to do this anyway? And I'm
Yeah.
like, hell yeah. I'm just gonna like
Yeah.
double down on it. Like, who cares? I'm gonna keep going.
Is this a kind of suffering that I will continue doing
Yeah.
whenever anybody thinks? Because this is the kind of suffering that makes me happy.
Yeah. And so that's building on like my thesis with publishing is it's flipped. Like traditional publishers go hardcover and then focus on ebooks and paperbacks. They completely de-rank ebooks by pricing them too high. And because they love their retailers and their margins on hardcover books. But personally, I'm going to be publishing, like I want to go digital first with like low price books. Then you buy the print book if you want a keepsake. And I'm launching a high end hardcover version in the spring. So it's going to be like a very, very high end book. It's going to be nicer than Stripe Press books.
Ooh,
And it's going to be
fighting words.
no. It's inspired by them, right? They couldn't do it at scale if they're doing like the extremely expensive ones. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna make like a beautiful book, and that will be for the people that are like, hell yeah, I love this idea, and I want like a permanent copy of this.
It's what Caroline Calloway did with Scammer, right? That it's just such a beautiful object. And I completely, I'm going to so buy this book. You cannot send me a free version. I'm going to buy it.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I see. She has a $45 version. This is cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the futures of books, right? Like what's going to happen is things are going to split up into like what you will have to add a kind of qualifier to the book when you will be talking about this object in the future. Is it an AI generated book? Is it an ebook? Is it I mean, we call coffee table books as a kind of in a condescending way, certain books that are valuable as objects or first editions or, folio editions and signed editions, but there will be much more of that. And it won't matter, like the idea matters.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much for being here, Paul Miller. This has been such a joy. It's almost always such a joy talking to you. I that we kind of like ripped through half of the topics in the universe. I hope that you will be back soon and we will do the other half.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. I think a lot of my success wouldn't happen without this broader ecosystem.
Thank you so much for being in it. And thanks everybody who was listening. I will see you very soon.